Attention healthcare people, not less than 10 game-changing tips for product managers in health tech, 3 product league mentors, and the answers for all the questions you may come up with in the chat, and yours truly, Moriya Kassis. We're starting right now. First to the stage is Arik Gaisler from New York City, engineering and product leader and product league mentor. Say hello to Lisa Hagen from Boston, founder and product coach at Ready Steady and product league mentor. Please shout out a big hello to Stepan Mitaki from London, co-founder and CEO at Cariel and product league mentor. What's up, leaguers, mentors, and speakers of today? Arik, Stepan, and Lisa, I'm so excited to have you here with us today. What's up?
Hello,
Great to be
nice
here.
Hi, everyone.
Hello. So excited to have you here with us today. So excited to talk about healthcare. I don't think this is a topic we discuss enough. And actually, this is one of the few topics you can actually make a change with in the world. You know, we always say our products make the world a better place. Well, here you actually have the chance to make the world a better place and not just use this word. So thank you so much, Arik, Stepan, and Lisa, for the opportunity to learn from you. Today we are going to discuss 10 tips that you guys are going to come up with. And then, as I said before, then the challenge is all about asking you the great questions, the wonders, the challenges, everything that our audience will come up with in the chat. So whoever is now watching us live over YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook, go ahead, introduce yourself in the chat and let us know what is your biggest question when it comes to healthcare product management. And we start with saying hello to Jill from London. Hello to you. Hi, Amanda, joining us from New Jersey. John from San Francisco. We have Beth joining us from Texas. We have Eagle, our very own Eagle. He's a mentee at Product League. Hello to you, Eagle, joining us from Israel with 60 years of experience in the medical device industry. Well, Eagle, I'm challenging you to bring the best questions in the chat. Get ready. I'm counting on you, guy. Please go ahead and submit all the questions that you have, all the wonders. It's a rare opportunity to have 3 product league mentors to answer all the questions that you guys may have about the subject. Now we're starting with the tips. And it's time to ask you guys, Lisa, Arik, and Stepan, are you ready to start?
Yes.
Let's do it.
Ready.
Fantastic. So we're going to start with one tip of my own. And this one is calling all healthcare product management to build an ecosystem. In healthcare, more than in any other domain, it's rarely about your product alone. And when you build strong relationships with other providers and administrators and patients, by the way, all of that to create something that is way bigger than your product, this is where you make it easier for your patients to use it, because most times your product is just one step of a bigger solution that they are looking for. So build an ecosystem around your product. This was my tip. And now, Arik, now it's your turn to share yours.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I think my first tip is, I think, a very, very obvious one. Healthcare screens regulations. You need to understand what kind of data you're collecting, what kind of data you're sharing, who are your users, and what are you collecting for them, especially in these days where data is so prevalent, AI solutions are so prevalent, and everything is AI infused, everything is AI enabled. There's so many regulations coming up right now, specifically around AI, bias, anti-discrimination, and so on. Understand them, understand what's currently there and what the trends are, and make sure you're building a compliant product. If I go on to my second tip, also a super important one, just identify your key stakeholders and notice the plural on the stakeholders. Every single healthcare product, regardless if it's a consumer one, a direct-to-consumer one, B2B one, you're going to have multiple stakeholders. You're going to be affecting multiple stakeholders in the chain, whether they're patients, whether they're health systems, payers, providers, insurance companies. You're going to be dealing with multiple stakeholders, sometimes with misaligned incentives that you need to understand. You need to know how to do your user research. You need to know how your product affects them and where in the critical path does your product sit with each one of these stakeholders. It's very, very challenging. Third tip is really around kind of like, how do you launch your product? Essentially, you're designing for the enterprise from day one. Every big player, this is especially true for B2B, but again, because there's multiple stakeholders, even for direct to consumer product, you're going to be building for big companies, big enterprise level companies from day one. Not only do you need to build enterprise level solutions, stuff like SSO, security, deployment, and so on, the product lifecycle when dealing with enterprises is different. You need to be ready for long sales cycles. You need to make sure that you have a very transparent roadmap because your salespeople are going to be selling ahead. And you need to have a very, very solid planning process. And you need to be prepared for that essentially from day one, whether you're building a new product or whether you're iterating in a current one, you're dealing from enterprises from the get-go. And we need to have a good kind of like product infrastructure, tech infrastructure to enable that growth with these companies.
Couldn't agree more with everything you shared, but I think the last one actually I find like the most, like the one that usually startups miss when they think about building a
Mm-hmm.
solution within the
Absolutely.
healthcare industry, right? They just don't think about the, like they think that once they will reach big companies as their clients, once they will reach this milestone, this is when you start building the infrastructure the right way for enterprise. Well, you're here to say the other way around, and it's correct, because you have to think about it like day one, and even before,
Absolutely.
if you can. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Absolutely. And you're right. Especially for startups, even when you're fundraising, you need to be able to think about these long sales cycles, these big customers that you're going to be dealing with. It's a completely different story.
and good VCs that actually have experience within this domain will look for this element when they
Mm-hmm.
interview you and meet with you. So
Absolutely.
it's absolutely a critical one. Thank you so much. Listen, Stepan, I can see you that you find much true in what we just shared,
Yeah,
what Eric just shared.
I would actually comment on that. Yeah, but for the first two tips, they especially resonate with me because I'm someone who's coming to healthcare after spending some time in other industries like
Mm-hmm.
consumer, fintech, and before healthcare, I was thinking like I need to work with stakeholders, and there are different ones, and obviously, but I never knew that in healthcare, even if you're building a very simple B2C product, you can
Mm-hmm.
have buyers, you can have providers, insurers, that's all different words. And you need to take into account all of that and also the regulations. I work in fintech, but in healthcare, it's a completely different level. And
Mm-hmm.
you need to be aware of that. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the few spaces where it's actually measured. People actually look for it, and if you're not compliant, you'll know about it. And so
Your
it's
legal
crucial.
team will know about that. Yeah,
Your legal team will
Yeah.
know about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely. Lisa, anything to add here? Because I saw that you resonated with much of the what was.
Yeah, I love all of those tips. I agree with all of them, especially on the last one. I think the point about startups trying to balance that level of innovation, right? And I don't know if you've had
Mhm.
experience with that yourself, but it's that how do we innovate and how do we go out to market and test things really quickly while still balancing, all of the compliance, all of the,
Absolutely.
scalability, all of the kind of enterprise concerns that one has that perhaps other industries don't have to contend with right off the bat.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. It's
Yeah.
What
very
brings
challenging.
us to your experience, Lisa, and your 3 tips?
Yes, yes. Tip number one for me is really to design with a deep understanding of the context for the diverse healthcare roles. So most products are in healthcare are used by a wide range of people, right? We're often serving patients, we think about caregivers, clinicians, providers, administrators. Most of my experience is in B2B, and we're serving multiple roles within multiple organizations. And I would say that each of these has a very different workflow, right? They have very different challenges. They have very different priorities in their day-to-day, which makes designing for them, I would say, a particularly fun challenge. So in order to create a product that works for all of those roles, we really need to deeply understand their context. And while that's obviously something all of us as product managers know to do, I would say, my experience moving into healthcare, I certainly didn't have an appreciation for the nuance, right, in what it really means to observe how they work and spend that time to have that deep understanding, right? We want to really get to the root at how does a clinician manage their patient notes during a busy shift, right? How does a caregiver juggle logistics or appointments, right, for a family member? How does a patient feel when they're navigating multiple logins, multiple systems, all of the endless paperwork, especially here in the US with our healthcare system, right? And then we think about how does operations staff efficiently manage their workflows, right? When we think about things like scheduling, authorizations, all of that. And so you really have to dig deep, right, with all of those different stakeholders or all of those different roles to identify what they really need. And a little bonus tip on this one is don't do this alone. If you're not already, bring your engineering lead, your technology lead, whoever that partner is with you. They are truly an invaluable resource to you, the team. They're a source of innovation, and they really help to bridge that gap between what users need and what is truly possible with the technology.
Loving that. Everything you said.
Thank you.
Every
Thank you.
word.
Okay. Moving on then to tip number 2, which is to foster collaboration across the healthcare stakeholders to deliver seamless solutions. Right. So as we already touched on just a little bit, we really need to bring together that diverse group of stakeholders from the very start. And I think, as Arik mentioned, each group has a different and sometimes competing agenda or a list of priorities, right? And again, we really want to understand, clinicians or providers want to focus on how does this product improve, patient care and outcomes, and how does this fit into my workflows? Legal teams are obviously concerned with compliance and HIPAA regulations, and operations need systems that streamline workflows, right? And they are efficient and they scale effectively. And so in healthcare, one of the issues is that if one of those stakeholder groups gets overlooked, there's some pretty serious consequences, not just to the business, but it could also be to the patient or the provider or the various kind of stakeholders that we need. I remember I worked on this project that was a SMS scheduling, very simple, right, thing. And right when you dug into it, it was operations needs a way to integrate that data into their systems. Compliance is telling me you can't send that over text messages because we can't share that type of, PHI. And so there's really important to bring those people together early and have these, meetings where you keep them up to date, keep them involved throughout. And we really want to facilitate discussions to uncover their concerns and their priorities, right? So that collaboration is critical.
Absolutely.
Love the example with the SMS because you usually know that problems, but you don't, unless you face them in a real life scenario, you don't really understand.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I thought it was going to be pretty straightforward. Turns out a lot more complex and a lot more stakeholder engagement, and learn the hard way of bringing everybody in at the beginning. Saves a lot of time and rework for sure. And my last tip number 3, is to really streamline your patient and provider workflows to reduce fatigue and, of course, enhance quality. So building on those last 2 tips, right, when you really understand your users and you're collaborating with your stakeholders, I've realized, just how much complexity we force onto patients and providers, that diverse group of roles that we serve, right? And how often unnecessary that is, right? I know, like in my experience, really getting to know the patient side of things, like people are already overwhelmed managing appointments, right? And their own care paths. And providers are like drowning in like administrative tasks that they need to do. And one of the things I've noticed is, a common issue we sometimes, don't do a great job solving for is asking people to input the same information over and over and over. Like, I don't know about you, but I hate that. And I especially hate that in like a healthcare settings, right?
Mhm.
As a patient, right? Providers hate, having to waste hours re-entering information into different systems that like don't talk to each other, right? So one of the things I like to do is really ask, is this solving a real problem for my diverse group of users, or are we just like adding another layer of complexity, right? So we want to simplify, 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 and make those workflows really feel effortless.
The example with
Amazing.
reinserting the data is like spot on.
Mhm.
Spot on. Unfortunately, it's spot on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for the 3 tips. And Stepan, are you ready?
Thank you. Yeah. So my first tip would be to optimize for trust and prioritize trust building features in your product design. So this was probably the very first advice I received when I was starting out in healthcare. And the guy who built multiple big healthcare companies told me, no matter what your idea is, no matter how good your product is, if you manage to convince a set of population to trust you, you already solved half of the equation. And at the very beginning, I thought like, I didn't think much of it, but it kind of stuck with me. Over time, I realized how important this is and actually how hard it is. And so always keep in mind to optimize for trust. Without trust, you won't be able to build a great product. And this is obviously true for many industries, but this is especially true for healthcare.
Yeah.
So this would be my first tip. For the second one, I would say make it fun. So inject fun into healthcare experiences to boost patient engagement. And we think of, from a very young age, think of healthcare as something dull and something people don't want to deal with, and unless they really have to. And I think that's also part of the problem. And a lot of companies keep doing that way. But I believe it's not necessary in most cases. And making it more fun could change things. And a good example I really like is, for instance, Auto Health. They made a very playful take on healthcare insurance. They were very different from other companies in the field. Another example, back in the day, but still had space, they kind of revolutionized meditation and mental health, but they kind of made it very fun instead of this Buddhist like you're doing this and you're going into mountains or something, but it's really fun. So don't forget to make it fun. And also it's just fun to build products that way. And my last tip, go ahead, Arik, if you.
No, I totally agree, especially, in healthcare, which is kind of like this field which is inherently unfun. Injecting fun can be, can make users kind of like really enjoy your product, and something that, really drives the product.
And I also love the fact, Stephanie, what you're saying, that once you understand the element of fun and the need for it, you also understand that the user journey actually goes before they are in need for a product, because it's also a prevention element to it. So good
Exactly.
health products actually think about the day before. So maybe you want to check something, maybe you need to interact with the hospital just for like, you know, like yearly tests or whatever it is. It's not necessarily about a time when you have to go into surgery or use your insurance because hell day is here. Hopefully not, right? So I like the fact that once you talk about fun, it goes beyond the normal user journey that we are talking about when we discuss healthcare. So spot on, love that.
Exactly. Healthcare is about prevention as well, and lifestyle. And coming to my third tip, I'd say focus on the outcomes, focus on measurable health outcomes. And obviously, this is something product managers do. And if you're not able to measure the outcomes, you won't be able to deliver continuously. And I've noticed that measuring the outcomes in healthcare is much more difficult rather than in traditional businesses. And because it's such a hard task, I've seen some companies kind of neglecting that or doing it just halfway. And that was a big problem. But if you're able to measure the health outcomes of your product, that will be fantastical for you, and you will be immediately ahead of the majority of other players in the field in your competition. So these are my 3 tips. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. These were 3 brilliant tips. And guys, I love that there is like a real healthcare product management in the chat, because you sparked so many great questions with your tips, that questions that go to the tips that you mentioned, and challenges that come from what you guys just shared. So are you ready for some Q&A?
Let's do
Yes.
that.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are starting with John's question, asking, how can I innovate on a product if compliance and leadership are afraid of new verticals? This is an interesting one.
I can start.
Go ahead.
If So the first thing is that, well, first of all, compliance and product team always kind of fight with each other. I worked in the fintech previously, and that was a constant battle. And you kind of have to, the first thing that you have to do is kind of build a relationship with them, because they have their own agenda and you need to understand them, obviously. So building the relationship and understanding what they might lose from that, what their gains are, and also helping to do their job would help you to them to have more risk appetite towards the new verticals and stuff like this. But if the leadership is afraid of new verticals and experimentation, that's a completely different problem here, and I'm probably something that you need to discuss with the leadership, I would say. But yeah, that's my answer.
So it's more of a
Yeah, I would also,
culture. Yeah. Ari, go ahead, please.
yeah, I would maybe completely agree. I would also add to that I would really suggest kind of embedding both compliance and, of course, leadership as part of your planning process. They have to be aware of what's going to happen and kind of like what's going to be built, especially in health tech, especially when compliance needs to be involved very early on, from as early as possible. So when you're actually planning the products themselves, or thinking about them, or A/B testing them, or kind of like just coming up with the ideas, that's when you need to bring them in to avoid kind of like later on any kind of like challenges in actually building the product itself. So kind of like getting them in the planning process as early as you can.
Yeah, and building on that, I would say if you can start with something small, right, like a small pilot project or something like that, that you can, test out those ideas, you can help to, mitigate or validate some of your assumptions and prove out some of those risks, right, that the compliance or the leadership has. I think that's going to help to go a long way. And trying to also like tie everything back to like, what problem are we trying to solve here, right, with like the innovation, right? And that helps, I think, in terms of communicating with folks that are maybe a little bit more risk averse, or they have some, hesitation.
Yeah.
Loving that. Thank you so much, guys. We're moving on to the next question. And Jill is here asking, how can I know that my product is fully compliant? It's a big one.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, indeed.
I'm happy to start this one, I guess.
Go ahead.
First of all, I think it depends a little bit on the specific regulation. Most of them, there's a process. There's kind of like you need to go with an auditor, and kind of like they go and check the system, and you need to do these kind of things. A lot of the regulations some of them are just snapshots, kind of like point in time, but most of them are ongoing efforts. Most of them are things that you need to show year after year or 6 months after 6 months, depending on the specific regulation, that you're compliant. And you work usually with external companies, and they do audits, and they do the things. You need to make sure that you have systems in place to actually monitor and to make sure that you are compliant, whether it's around employees and how they interact with the system, who has access to the system, stuff like monitoring if you have like an AI products in healthcare, that's specific monitoring that you need to do there, you need to make sure that you have the right tools and the right tools in place as well. And it's a big part of your product. You need to make sure that you put in time as part of your product strategy to make sure that you implement the right tools, you have the right processes for the right tools. When you build a new product or build a new feature, you look at the output of kind of like all of your monitoring tools and take that as the input into your new product development. And you need to embed it as part of your kind of like day-to-day product lifecycle.
Yes, I like to make friends with my compliance department for that, right? Although there are like often tension, right, as you mentioned before, go make friends and bring them along and invite them early, right, into the things that you're working on. Give them a heads up on like, well, these are kind of the initiatives or these are the outcomes that we're looking to achieve over the next quarter or the next 6 months or however you're doing your planning, right? And like, do you have any things that come to mind like immediately? And so you're starting to like bake that in as you're going through the producting, as you're starting to think about solutions. We're forming some of those constraints that we have going forward to ensure that the product and the features you're developing are going to be compliant because they're right along with you.
Early on, as early on as possible. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Loving that. Yeah,
great
go
answer.
ahead.
Yeah, I would add that, yeah, obviously be friends with the legal team. They're your best friends in that. And I'm sure there are some, it depends on what your product is and what your customers are, but there are some frameworks and tools that helps you to identify what exactly do you need to be able to comply with the things. And also, don't be afraid to just ask ChatGPT or Claude to get the first initial understanding of what the requirements are. Obviously, don't rely on that for any legal advice, but that's a good starting point again.
Is a starting point? Absolutely, yes. And I love, yeah, I love this recommendation. And now we have another two questions, awesome questions in the chat, if I may. But before we're moving on, everyone who is viewing us right now, you know how the algorithm works. Go ahead, like this video, share it with your colleagues, with your boss, with whomever is in need to listen to Arik, Stepan, and Lisa, and to hear the words of wisdom before or while you build the next big healthcare product. And we're moving on to the question that comes from Eagle. And he's asking, how does discovery work in healthcare products? How do you approach gathering data from and about clinical users and or patients without having to perform official trials regulated by the Helsinki Declaration and other regulatory constraints? I knew you will bring some good questions. Thank you, Ego. I challenged you, and you actually made it work. So, how do we do that, guys? How do we collect the data that we need for the discovery phase without actually going through all this mess that comes with the regulation that is behind healthcare?
I can start.
Yeah.
I would say I'm unfamiliar with some of those particular regulatory things mentioned in there. However, generally speaking, right, like we want to go through and ensure that we've defined that problem space. Like this is all I say is like, what is the problem? What are we trying to solve? We need to get into like, what is that patient journey? What are those provider workflows? What are those administrative challenges, right? And we really need to understand also what outcomes we're aiming for, right? And so that is like really key. Again, you know, observing folks as they're working where possible, right, in the discovery, like how are people working today? Just by asking questions isn't going to give you the information that you truly need to ensure that we're solving the right problems, right? We need to see how they're working, what they're doing, and mostly people can't describe the actual problem, right? We're going to discover that through our work. So I would say start there.
A great advice. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead,
Maybe I
Ari.
can add. I'll add a little bit. Maybe it is a little bit controversial, but it's hard to skip. Kind of like if you have like a really clinical oriented product that eventually affects patients and their lives, and you have to do that, there will come a stage where you need to do what you need to do. I mean, like we said earlier, in healthcare, it's one of the only spaces that you can't really get around it. I think there's a lot of work that you can do before that to kind of like get up and running, specifically around clinical data. There's usually research around specific area that you can read up on, that you can kind of like investigate, that you can kind of like dig deep into before you actually go into any kind of clinical trials. Because you're right, you do want to get to the clinical trials and, you know, be prepared for it. And because it is obviously expensive, time consuming, and so on, there's usually no way around that. We want to get prepared. And so I would kind of maybe reframe it around not how can you avoid doing the clinical trials, but how can you come as best prepared as possible towards your clinical trials when you need to do them.
Yeah, these barriers to entry are there for a reason.
Yeah.
So you can skip them sometimes. Oftentimes, you just need to be aware of them because they are there for a reason. Yeah, absolutely, and it makes every startup's life way harder. Indeed. Stepan, anything to add here? Because the next question is actually goes to you. So like, be prepared.
Oh, let's go.
Okay.
Let's go straight into
So
that.
here's Amanda asking, everyone said in one way or another about trust. Yeah. Do you have any tips on the best way to build trust? Goes back to one of the tips that you mentioned, and we are all eager to hear from you and then from Arik and Lisa as
Yeah,
well.
I can start off. So it obviously depends on the product that you're building and whether it's B2C, B2B, and stuff like this. But I can give you a few like real life examples and scenarios of. Well, the first thing is obviously talk to your users and identify those points of friction where they feel like they don't trust the product. One example that worked for us really is that we're building text-based communication for parents and pediatricians. And the way we wanted to build the product initially is that you would be connected to random pediatrician and just start talking to them. And we would just tell the name of our brand. But essentially, we realized that every person doesn't want to, people don't want to talk to the brand, even if the brand is very good and trustworthy and so on. They want to talk to people. They want to see real face, and face build trust. They want to know their name. They want to know something about the doctor that is speaking with them. So that kind of an very good example where you can build and optimize for trust. And so look for those opportunities where your customers are saying that they don't believe your product or something like this, and find those opportunities. So that would be my answer.
Absolutely spot on. Thank you so much. Arik and Lisa, you guys are next.
Yeah, I think the example, Stepan, you gave makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think I can tie it into also another tip that you gave around outcomes. I think especially in healthcare, with specifically kind of like obviously in the US, where a system is very much broken, providing outcomes and kind of like providing something that provides kind of like real tangible solutions is important, and that builds trust. When you show someone that you're doing something that provides them value, and kind of like you show them that you're doing something correctly and kind of like providing real value, that builds trust. And in health tech specifically, kind of like getting to that stage of providing value quickly, rewarding users or using businesses very quickly throughout the user kind of like life cycle, is super, super critical, exactly because of that, because you want to build that trust very quickly. And it's important to kind of to show those outcomes and show that value as quickly as you can as part of your product journey, your user journey in your product.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I would reinforce consistency, right? And that like is applicable to both your end users, but also like your stakeholders, your leaders, right, within the organization, right? We want to ensure that we're consistently, solving the right problems, we're delivering on the outcomes that we have promised to the various groups, right? And making sure that we have, good quality, right, in those outcomes that we are delivering on. And I think the other piece would be around transparency, right? It's, important to be transparent, right? As we walk through like the whole kind of journey, right? We're talking about end users again, or we're talking about stakeholders. We just want to be a little bit honest, right? And like, that's okay. Some things we don't know, that's okay to say that. It's okay to even be, transparent as we're doing discovery, right, with our users and really just ask them questions. And that's going to start to build that level of trust because they understand that we're deeply invested in trying to get to the root of their problem and solve it for them in like a meaningful way.
Absolutely. And I agree with you on that, because another layer of the distrust that we see so often in healthcare comes from the fact that users feel like they're out of the loop. They don't
Yep.
really understand what's going on. The terminology is awful, so many stakeholders to talk to, the process is extremely long. Just by letting users know where things stand, even if you didn't get anything solved yet, or just a
Yes.
small bit of that solved, just by letting them know where things stand, you get a little bit of trust. And then, you just build that with them every time that you make users feel part of the solution. Because let's be honest, this is how we feel about healthcare: out of the loop, terminology that is like scary. And yeah, these three mentors are here to help you guys to solve this and change the healthcare industry forever, hopefully. I feel like we could have spent another 3 hours discussing product management in healthcare done right. But unfortunately, our time is up. So, Arik Gaisler, Stepan Mitaki, and Lisa Hagen, I had the best time having you here on our stage. I myself learned so much. I love the questions that the guys submitted here in the chat, and I truly thank you for being here and being the mentors that you are, not only with your mentees at Product League, but also with the whole community, sharing your know-how. This is Product League. You are Product League, as the awesome mentors that you are. So thank you so much, Arik, Lisa, and Stepan. I had such a great time having you here on our stage, and I can't wait to have you again here again. So get ready.
Thank you.
I hope
Thank
you
you.
enjoyed it as well. And until then, bye bye, Lakers. Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.